Hello, time for another vlog. This time I'm going to talk about Brexit. And I've got my Brexit mug here, although I've just finished the tea, so you'll have to stay there. I'm hoping the caffeine will hit and I'll stay awake. It's April the 6th, 2019. So by the time you watch this, if you're watching it some other time, then maybe all this will have been sorted out by then. But at the moment, it's not resolved. It's total chaos. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And all the arguments are still flying back and forth, and Parliament hasn't decided on what sort of agreement it wants with the EU. The EU hasn't decided on what Parliament wants because Parliament doesn't know what it wants. Theresa May have some plans, but they're top secret if they are, or they're so top secret even she doesn't know what she's doing. So it's chaos. But of course chaos is a natural part of life in this universe. It represents change, and change often is a bit destructive of the old before the new is constructed. So let's kind of hope that the new, when it comes along, will be better. There's no guarantee of that, obviously. But what I was wanting to do was to look at a bit the Remainer arguments and the Brexiter arguments. I was in favour of Brexit at the time of the referendum, so I voted to leave. I have to say, it's looking a bit more shaky now, but still, I'm inclined towards leaving still for the same reasons as I was before, and we'll get into that. But I see people arguing back and forth in the alternative media. There's no point looking at the mainstream media for arguments, really. I just wanted to say a bit about how I would characterise the arguments. So, the Remainer arguments, first of all. Now, maybe as a pro-Brexit person, or semi-pro-Brexit anyway, I'm getting this wrong. So if there are any Remainers watching, let me know in the comments if I'm not correct, if I'm missing the main point. I tend to look at people's discussions of this on my Twitter feed, basically. I mean, okay, I've got Facebook and Instagram and so on, but they're really dull, to be honest. At least with Twitter I can follow quite interesting people in some areas. But on the whole, it seems to me the Remainer arguments, certainly when put by ordinary people in response to famous people's tweets, tend to revolve around money. The idea is that Britain is committing economic suicide, seppuku, an honourable harakiri, or whatever it's called, right? By doing this. And they're not wrong, I think. It's definitely going to be financially traumatic. Government forecasts reckon that GDP on Brexit for the year following Brexit will be down between 5 and 10% in Britain. That's a crash of major proportions for a large economy. So it will certainly hit jobs. Unemployment will go up. Government deficit will presumably go up because of benefits payments to people, etc. And you may end up with rioting because the benefits are harder to get and keep these days, and they keep pushing people to find jobs when there aren't jobs. and people will probably get a bit annoyed with that. Rightly so. I'm not inciting any trouble here. Stay at home. But what will be will be. So yeah, money. Another thing the Remainers tend to feel is that the Brexiters are racist and stupid. Okay, there's no doubt that some Brexiters are outright racists, and they don't want foreigners immigrating into the country, even though actually every Brit, the entire population, derives from elsewhere in the world. Actually, over not that many generations, there's very few that have been here since the Stone Age. 100%. I mean, the Celts come from Phoenicia and places like that, the Middle East. The Anglo-Saxons are, Germans and Eastern Europeans ultimately. There's Spanish in here. There's obviously Vikings, Nordics, and so on. There are not many ultra-native Britons that go back more than 1,000 years, really. But anyway, there is racism, and it has to be said that the political parties favouring Brexit carefully pushed that button somewhat, and so did the Silicon Valley alternative media companies, actually. Certainly going by my YouTube feed. I don't know what their agenda is, except to get more views regardless, I suppose. But yeah, I don't hold any truck with racism. I think it's stupid. But there is an element to it. And maybe there were enough votes there to tip the decision. I don't know. It was close, wasn't it? But there's also the point to remember that a large proportion of the electorate didn't bother to vote at all. And they shouldn't really be complaining if the result was not what they liked, because not voting means I don't care. It could mean I was too busy to vote, but I don't think a third of the population was too busy to vote. So yeah, money is going to be a big problem. The economy is going to take a serious hit. Politicians, Brexit politicians, are stupidly saying, "Oh, we can trade with World Trade Organization rules and it'll all be fine." I think they're being mendacious. It's not going to be straightforward. You'll still need to make trade deals, and those don't happen overnight. And if they do, we'll end up eating chlorinated chicken from America or something. We'll all die of cancer in 30 years' time or something. So politicians are just being politicians, and sadly most of the public just buy what they say. Anyway, Remainers also think, I mentioned that Brexiters are a bit stupid because money. Because for the Remainers it looks like the financial arguments are key, and they don't really get that for the Brexiters it's not that important. Yes, we're all going to suffer financially despite what the Brexit politicians claim. But it's not about that for the Brexiters, and that's why the whining about money doesn't have any impact. It's the wrong argument to make. If you're going to make arguments against Brexiters, you need to argue about politics and the Constitution, because that's where the people who want to leave are. We know, those of us who think a bit, that the politicians are lying when they say it's all going to be okay. In the same way as when they took us into the so-called common market, those of us who were thinking about it at the time were well aware that what they meant but were carefully not saying was a federal union. Ultimately, a United States of Europe was what they wanted. And I was in favour of that at the time, but what's happened is we've gone into a system which is going that way without the checks and balances which exist, say, in the United States system. So we end up with like corporate rule and no proper representation. And that's key to why Brexiters want to leave. Really, there are a couple of arguments. There's a constitutional one that, in particular, this goes to the immigration issue and the racism issue. There's a problem with 1 million extra people coming into this small country every 3 years, when they're coming from countries that, on the whole, don't have a constitutional separation of church and state. That may sound rather abstract, but in Western Europe, the separation of church and state has allowed government to be run on a more rational basis. I'm not saying politicians are rational, but it's more rational, because decisions can be made based on knowledge and science and not on superstition and Bronze Age random beliefs. So government is more adaptable to modern times, and yeah, they're more capable of making huge mistakes too, perhaps, because at least the ancient religions kept things stable in a certain way. Although hypocritically they preach love and send out armies all over the place. It's kind of weird how humans do that. So the feeling is that if we're bringing in large numbers of people from countries which don't have that kind of constitution, they're going to start agitating for changes in their general direction. And, well, that would be democracy, sure, but I guess the longer term inhabitants here don't fancy that. Some of them. So it's not really about the people. The individuals who are here are fine. Okay, they're hardworking. Some of them integrate quite well. It's more about what it means in the long term for the way this country is governed. I've heard very few people complaining that their jobs are at risk because of all the competition from people coming in. That may be because I'm living in London, and about half the available jobs in Western Europe are here, basically. So it's really quite easy to find a job in London at the moment, if you're a bit gung-ho about it and proactive. So I found it anyway. Things may change with Brexit. They probably will for a few years, but right now it's not an issue, and I haven't heard people being concerned with it. That may be different in some other parts of the country. There are parts of the country where there are no jobs. London has sort of sucked all the business up, because it's obviously better for a business to set itself up where there's more customers and more suppliers. but people are concerned that there'll be a change to the culture for the worse. It's not totally clear whether that's going to happen or not, obviously, but that's a concern. Another issue is kind of political and constitutional, in that when Tony Blair's government liberalised the immigration rules to allow these huge numbers of people to come in, they have in fact since admitted that one of their considerations was that new immigrants tend to vote left-wing, for governments like Tony Blair's, in other words, Labour governments. And so bringing in large numbers of immigrants implies bringing in large numbers of Labour voters. Once these people have established themselves, their voting patterns are likely to settle down into a more even split. But when they are fresh immigrants, they're more likely to vote to the left because they're more likely to want benefits. Now, mass immigration is different from normal immigration, and it's different from refugee immigration. They're all separate cases, so it's the mass immigration is the issue. Normal immigration was at a rate of about 10 to 30,000 a year, but the mass immigration has been more like 300,000 a year since Tony Blair. But still, we haven't had much in the way of Labour governments since the crash of 2008. I think a lot of the population blamed Labour for that, and I certainly did. Although they were doing the same as governments elsewhere, they shouldn't have been. They should have been thinking for themselves. Too much to ask, obviously. There's another issue, cultural issue, in that as politicians will tend to pander to these other cultures, because democracy's role or job is to get politicians to do what people want, right? However badly the system works. We've seen sort of hints of this, like the Mayor Sadiq Khan in London apparently catering to his Muslim electorate or constituency by getting advertising posters showing women in bikinis taken down off buses and things like that, saying it's oppressive of women, but at the same time you note it's also in line with what his main constituents are likely to favour, and that's not about removing the oppression of women. I don't know whether that's really a trend yet. It's just something I've seen. I don't think there are enough instances of it for me to say, yep, there's some dots there that can be joined up. Although we have recently had a woman on an aeroplane told to cover up because she was wearing a crop top. I don't know if that was in Britain or even in America, I don't know, but it's the same kind of thing. It's a restriction on freedom of expression, which is unreasonable, and in these cases oppressive of women. Some would say, of course, that women baring their bodies is an oppression of them too, in another way. But the fact is, in our society, women want to dress like that, and that's their privilege. The Victorians and the Edwardians would have been tremendously surprised when the rules on women's behaviour were lifted at how women chose to dress, I think, from the 1960s and Mary Quant onwards, right? It's all gone surprisingly. Women like to use their power in their own way. And I think attempts to restrict that are bad, but we also have to note that corporations, of course, exploit it too. nothing is straightforward. Another political aspect is that it's pretty clear that globalists are running the EU without reference to what the population as a whole want. And they even refer to populist politicians and populist ideas where the term populist is used as an insult. But populism is democracy, isn't it? Something is popular because people want it, even if they're mistaken. So we're getting democracy subtly undermined by this kind of use of words. If populism is a bad thing, it's a particular slant on democracy. Populism, they tend to mean right-wing views, typically, these days. The thing is, democracy requires an educated population to work well, and a thoughtful population to work well, and yet we in the West have had 2 generations probably of the population being dumbed down deliberately by corporate mass media, governments in the West implementing step by step a kind of a 1984-ish Brave New World kind of society, in which, in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, the population were all distracted with gadgets and sex and drugs, whilst the ruling class did what they wanted. Does it sound familiar? We also are getting increasingly restrictions on freedom of speech. While it's perfectly right that incitement to crime is wrong and incitement to hatred of whatever type is wrong, we seem to be getting more and more restrictions on freedom of speech, because just because someone's views are not palatable, they're getting booted off the alternative media, the Silicon Valley media, unfairly in many cases. And if people cannot even see the arguments, how are they going to be arguing against these people? If their arguments are so stupid, what's the problem, basically? Are they being booted off because their arguments are good? That's a bit strange. Also, in our society today, in the big corporations, the globalist companies, if you work for one, I think you will understand that there is no such thing as freedom of speech in the workplace in these big corporations. And lying to customers is normal. I was at the supermarket doing my weekly shop, okay, and there on the checkouts was a sign saying this area is monitored by CCTV for your safety and security. Now we all know that the CCTV there is there because they think we're thieves and they want to make sure we don't steal anything. But instead they lie and say it's for our safety and security. At best you could say it is for our safety and their security. But this kind of lying is rampant in modern society. It's all over the place. You phone up a company and you're put into a queue and we're told that your call is important and that's why you're going to have to wait for half an hour because they don't have enough staff. And they haven't had enough staff for years because they don't care about your call. They want you to go away. Right. You go to websites and now it pops up we care about your privacy. And if you actually go into it, you've got about 90 buttons to press to turn off all the stupid cookies they want to leave and the tracking tools. Because they don't care about your privacy. Right? Total lies everywhere. And we just swallow it because we're gullible like sheep and we've been dumbed down. And we don't protest about it. And rights are being systematically taken away by governments too, of course. I mean, you can read the books of David Icke if you really want to see it written out in excruciating detail. I know he says a lot of things which are questionable at best, and completely unbelievable in some cases, but some of the things actually make you think a bit. I'll leave you to read his stuff if you want. Thinking back, I can think of, say, this is a long time ago, the Spycatcher case under Margaret Thatcher, where I forget the author's name, but he was an ex-secret agent, and he wrote a book revealing, frankly, some of the crimes the government had committed. And he was taken to trial for breaking the Official Secrets Act, which he clearly had done. Okay, revealed secrets of illegal activity by the government. Now, the judge ruled to the jury that they must find him guilty because the evidence showed that clearly he had broken the law. Okay. The jury found him not guilty. The judge was angry. He insisted they find him guilty. He locked the jury up overnight so that they would change their verdict. They refused. He had to let them go. Not guilty, because a jury has the right to bring in any verdict they wish, regardless of the evidence. Otherwise, there's no point in having a jury. Right. They felt that what he had done was in the national interest, uncovering government lies and criminal activity. And of course it was in the national interest, but the government didn't like it, so they changed the law so that in future such cases will not be tried by a jury. That's just corruption. Okay, I think it was John Major that did that, his government. And today we have people like Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden being pursued again for illegally revealing secret criminal activity on the part of governments. And these criminals are not prosecuted, of course. The whistleblowers are chased because our governments are run by criminals, clearly. Otherwise, the right people will be pursued. So, how is this happening? It's from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. You distract the people with iPhones and gimmicks and Instagram feeds and anything to dumb them down, shorten their attention span, take their attention away. If they can go to the club and get some sex and drugs and whatever, then when it comes to a vote, they'll say, I'm all right, Jack, the government must be doing something right, and they'll vote mainstream. So the ruling classes can do what they want, whilst the sheeple are fully immersed in their Instagram feeds. And this is why, perhaps, the Remainers are mostly concerned with money, because they're only thinking about themselves. And okay, they're afraid of jobs being lost for other people too, but they're not thinking about the long-term welfare of the population as a whole, about how the country is governed. So they're supporting the globalists while these criminals are step by step removing our rights and making us more and more stupid. Now, if you're a Remainer and you feel I've characterised that incorrectly, let me know. But that's how it feels as a Brexiter. And that's why arguments about it's going to be economic chaos don't really carry that much weight, because it's a short-term pain for a longer-term gain. Britain has been run really by globalists for a long time, by the elites for centuries. But still, we had a kind of a semi-functioning democracy, and it's just failing more and more as the elites tighten their grip and followed up on their long-term plans to make us all just intelligent enough to do our jobs until they can replace us with robots and let us starve. And the Brexit vote was a chance to put a spanner in the works, basically. I mean, I guess they'll find a way to have a non-Brexit Brexit, like a customs union. We do probably need a deal with the EU. It's going to be less problematic for Britain financially if we do have some sort of deal. I don't know if Auntie May's appalling deal will really be the way to go, or just a customs union plus bits with no say in how it's all done, because we won't be on the council anymore. Whatever, something. We're going to have to make a deal if we leave with no deal anyway. It'll take years rather than being done on the spot. Whatever the deal is, it can ultimately be renegotiated, and that will take years, of course, by globalists, politicians who don't want to change a thing. So it's not totally satisfactory, but it's a bit of a move. Okay. What do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? I'm interested to hear your views. It's all difficult, I know. There you go. Bye for now.